Trails and Ghost Towns with Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts, and Bill Barlee is our tour guide for things that happen in Western Canada at the time of, I guess, 1850s and onward.
Yeah.
But we've been generally talking about British Columbia, a little bit of northwestern United States into the Yukon. Today we're going to a different location.
Yeah, a little departure for us, Mike. We're going into what I consider probably the most desolate country in at least Western North America. It's the real badlands of Alberta. It has a stark beauty that few other places have. You can walk in this country literally for miles and never see a soul. And this is the old buffalo country of the southeastern corner of Alberta. Not
the southwestern. We always hear a lot about the hoodoos in that country and Drumheller being the badlands, but neither of those measure up to this spot.
I don't think so, you know. After traveling through both of these areas fairly extensively, I feel that the Milk River country around Writing on Stone is the real badlands of Alberta.
And the phrase "writing on stone" is where we'll come back when we come back after these breaks to discuss southeastern Alberta, the Milk River country, writing on stone. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee. Writing on Stone, the name of the place, and I guess there's a very good reason why it's called Writing on Stone.
Yeah, well, the Indians, the sandstone in this particular area, Mike, when the Indians passed through, they found it was ideal for putting pictographs on. And this is a pictograph which depicts a battle between the Indians and the whites, and it may be, and there are some historians which think this is correct, that it may be the battle between the Indians and the whites, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, in 1876.
What's the fate of that pictograph right now?
Well, unfortunately, many of these pictographs have been cut away, so they've been victims of vandalism, which is a shame. So we have some of the original photos, and that's all.
Why did they choose that area to write on stone? Was there something religious or sacred? Why did anybody frequent the Badlands anyway?
Well, Mike, this was the old buffalo country when the Milk River cut through that country there, and you had grasslands stretching for miles and miles. And there were, and this gives an example of it. You can see the plateau above, and here's the Milk River cutting in on the right-hand side. And this is Police Coulee. We're looking right up Police Coulee. This is typical of this country around Writing on Stone. It's really unsurpassed in its vivid beauty.
Remarkable place. You've got some paintings by C.M. Russell.
Yes.
He's a pretty famous Western, but he's looked upon as an American painter.
Yes, he is, but you know, there's a little more to Russell than most people realize, is that some of his formative years were spent in the Alberta country. He knew the Blackfoot Indian. He went through that country in 1885 from High River south, essentially, and you know, realized that the Blackfoot, of all the Plains Indians, were the most dangerous of all. I mean, no one disputed the right-of-way with the Blackfoot. And so Russell knew this, other Westerners knew this. The traders who went through the plains and various other individuals who traveled on the Great Plains, they would give wide berth to only one territory. This was the Blackfoot territory. And no one disputed the right-of-way until, of course, they were decimated by plague and smallpox and so on.
Now, this painting is called When Sioux and Blackfoot Meet, so obviously territory was jealously guarded before the white man arrived, and obviously when the white man arrived, things got even worse.
Oh, sure. Because you see, they were the finest light horsemen in the world. There's no doubt about it. The old Plains Indians could run and mount a horse literally at a flying start, and they could disappear in a flash. They were here and they were gone. And Russell realized this, and he depicts it in many of his paintings. And this photograph, probably taken around the turn of the century or just prior to it, by one of two photographers, probably based out of Calgary at that particular time. This shows one of the old Blackfoot Confederacy, and very, very interesting picture. And this is a group of Indians lined up, and they evidently liked the photographer because the Indians felt that they might lose their soul in some respects if they had their image taken. So they're very careful of it, but here they've got over it, and you can see them wearing their various regalia.
And we have some of that regalia right here.
Yes.
Now, this is just remarkable work. What is this called?
Well, that's a breastplate, and this would be similar to what some of the warriors would be wearing, and they would actually put this over their head, and this is where it would fit right over the head and down over the shoulders. Quite heavy, and this would be manufactured. These are all manufactured goods, Mike. And
what does that mean? These were trade goods brought in by the whites?
These trade beads would be made for the Hudson's Bay Company, we'll say in Murano, Italy, or some other areas where they originally made the glass trade beads. And some of them, of course, on the West Coast were made in places probably like Canton, China. That was the Russian trade bead, which was a faceted bead. But these beads, of course, were really quite well known, and the Indians preferred really the blue, the robin's egg blue, rather than any other color.
Did they wear any regalia like this prior to the arrival of the white man? I mean, is this?
Yes, but it wasn't as fancy. Really, with the arrival of the white men and the arrival of the trade goods from the Hudson's Bay Company, the Northwest Company, the XY, and so on, they found that this opened up a whole new era for them, and they were able to
these
use
cuffs?
Tennessee beads, yes. And they would be able to use Tennessee beads and all the other types of beads that actually...
Called Tennessee?
Yes, these are almost a Tennessee. A Tennessee is a smaller bead. This is a very, very remarkably fine bead, which might be several 100,000 to one garment. So this is a little larger than the Tennessee bead.
That's remarkable work. And look at this is leather and the beadwork that's all done. And
a medicine pouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really quite remarkable. This is floral design, and some of them are geometric design. Generally speaking, the geometric design is an older design than the floral design.
They pick it. This almost looks like the fleur-de-lis on there. Would they have picked that maybe up from?
Almost, yeah.
And these are leather leggings. The leather is just so unbelievably soft on this.
Yeah, that's really quite remarkable. And surprisingly, Mike, is that many people don't know that the Indian women, when they made these leggings were made, and they were made actually with a Singer sewing machine. And they would come in and trade some goods to one of the white women for the use of the Singer sewing machine. And they would use the Singer sewing machine and complete the work on this, and then they would leave a trade good behind in payment for the use of the machine.
So obviously, if you're finding something like this, it may be authentic Canadian Indian circa 1890, but it's probably been made on a white sewing machine.
Well, some of them, not all of them. You know, a considerable number of them.
Yeah, these are remarkably fancy.
Oh,
where did you find these?
Well, they came out of actually the southwestern corner of Saskatchewan, so very close to the old, Cree Blackfoot country.
Yeah. You have a photograph of a trail which has been across the prairie for eons of time.
That's right.
If I were to see that, I'd think that you know, a group of cows had walked by recently. But how long has that trail been there?
Actually, the cows still use this. This has been here probably for tens of thousands of years. And if you were to examine that rock, which is sitting right on the prairie, and you can almost visualize the buffalo coming in here in eons and eons ago before the white man hit the prairies. And you can see the old trail, which has actually worn a groove in the plains there. And the stone itself is about 5 feet high, and the remarkable part about it, it's kind of a buffalo wallow as well as rubbing stone. And the stone itself is slick. It's actually slick because so many thousands of buffalo were rubbing against that stone like sandpaper. And so the stone eventually became, and of course a little bit of grease off the fur, you see, and off the hair of the hide. And so it's become very, very slick. And there are still a number of them here and there in the prairies, especially in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
And these rocks, I guess, what, deposited by glaciers or something?
Probably glacial erratic, sure.
And that was a location the buffalo hemmed in on to just for a back scratching.
Yep.
It's been there forever.
Sure.
There were millions of buffalo on the prairie at one time.
Yeah, you know, it's really surprising. When we talk about the Milk River country and writing on stone, and the Greasy Grass Hills, of course, are just to the south in Montana. So you're looking at the Montana-Alberta border, essentially, you're looking at in this particular area. And there was a plainsman sat on the Greasy Grass Hills, which is very close to the area we're looking at today. And he sat there for about 4 days and estimated, a very careful estimate, of 3 million buffalo passed. And he said it was really quite remarkable. He couldn't get away from the spot because the earth actually trembled because of the weight of the 3 million buffalo, and they were pounding their way south, going across the prairie, and of course they moved back and forth with the grass.
And well, I wouldn't want to move either. I mean, if I had a safe spot and let 3 million buffalo go by.
But
who is this man?
I can't remember the name of the individual, Mike. I was trying to find the quote, and I cannot remember. One of the fairly well-known American plainsmen, but not as well-known that I can recall it.
Now, if a weapon wasn't available, How would the Indians kill? What does this picture tell us about the way Indians would kill the
this
buffalo?
this would be typical of one of the buffalo jumps, and they would actually put up breastworks and drive the buffalo into kind of a funnel, and then stampede them until they became extremely agitated, and they would be running dead level, and then of course they would drive them right over the edge of the jump, and at the bottom, of course, almost all the buffalo would be injured, and they would be able to pick them off there. And surprisingly enough, I was taken around this country by a very, very fascinating guy, a guy called Lawrence Helmerast, who was a rancher in there and knew every part of this country. And I was very fortunate to meet him. He was a very fine man. And I remember he took me to one of these buffalo jumps, Mike, and I said, gosh, I said, that's remarkable, Lawrence. I said, this is probably one of the best buffalo jumps in Alberta. He said, oh, yeah, it is. He says, very, not well known at all. And we had to go through various ranchers' fields and open them, and he knew all the combinations and all the locks and everything else, took me down there. I said, well, and there were literally hundreds and hundreds, perhaps thousands, remains of thousands of buffalo at the bottom of this jump. And I said, do you ever find any arrowheads? Oh, sure, he says, Bill. And he reached in and he pulled out an arrowhead. He says, here, he says, take that one. And he pulled an arrowhead right out of one of the buffalo bones at the bottom of the jump. And this is typical of that particular country.
Well, is it Regina that used to be known as Pile of Bones, and it was a location of a buffalo jump
sure.
as well?
Well, remember, there were probably, I would think, at least 100 buffalo jumps in that in Saskatchewan, Alberta.
Any old cliff in a storm. This,
virtually.
The buffalo jump would have been used when? Before the Indians had acquired things like this Springfield rifle?
Generally before, but also after, Mike. Before the buffalo were essentially disappeared from the northern plains, which would be the 1870s.
Where did you pick up this little, and you feel that this is an Indian rifle?
Oh yes, it is an Indian rifle. This is almost dead certain. It's an 1863 Springfield. It's got the cut down. It's a cut down barrel, so that's a carbine. It's a percussion cap. It's got, and the telling thing here, Mike, is the brass beads at the side. Sometimes they had many more brass beads, and sometimes they're made in designs, X's, and usually geometric designs.
Would the Indian people have had the technology to cut off the barrel of a long-barreled rifle?
Yes, actually, they usually did have some files. And the reason they cut the barrel off, Mike, it's easy to swing that rifle into action, and usually they held this rifle with one hand while they were riding down the buffalo, so that to hold a short-barreled rifle or a carbine with one hand, much easier than holding a long-barreled rifle with one hand.
That's a 50 caliber. That'd stop a buffalo at close range.
Oh yeah, for sure it would. Okay. And of course, it isn't like a Sharps. The Sharps was, was a magnificent buffalo gun, and that's specifically what the Sharps was made for.
And I guess the great wiping out of the Canadian Indian is associated with the eradication of the buffalo herd.
Yeah, the Canadian Indian and the American Indian. Certainly it was a policy in the United States, an early policy, and then the American military admitted this, that to make the Indian go back into the reserve situation, they had to wipe out the buffalo. And indeed they did. It was a systematic destruction of the buffalo, so that at one time there were only a few left.
You have another shot in here. I think this is another Russell painting. And this is about the coming of the Northwest Mounted Police to the region. Why did they show up? What was important about the arrival of the Northwest Mounted Police to this area?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, the Northwest Mounted Police came in to police the area, Mike, in 1874. So the great trek of the Northwest Mounted Police began in 1874, and there were, at that particular time, there were outlaw forts, Whoop Up and so on, various outlaw forts in southwestern Alberta. And the Indians were receiving illicit liquor at this particular time, which the authorities felt was not a good thing. So they decided to move in on these posts and clean them out, and indeed they did. So, but they also moved into various other parts of Alberta. And by 1887, 13 years after the Mounted Police came into the Great Plains, they established a fort at Writing on Stone. And that's right at the big curve of the Milk River, actually at the mouth of Police Coulee.
And the rustlers found this country, not only rum runners, but rustlers found this popular country to hide out in.
Well, it was easy country to get lost in, Mike. You could wander through that country today, and you could give anybody the slip. And the rustlers knew this too. So you had hoodoos, you had coolies, you had bald prairie. A rider could disappear in a minute in certain parts of that country and never be traced.
Going to take a break here, but when we come back, there's some fascinating stories. I guess Rustler's Cave is the phrase which...
Or Horse Thieves' Cave.
Horse Thieves' Cave. It just keeps the blood tingling. We'll be back with Gold Trails and Ghost Towns and a look at Horse Thieves' Cave when we come back after these breaks. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee. Not talking about ghost towns today, but about the badlands of southeastern Alberta. Yeah. You say that the police built a fort in front of Police Coulee. That was the name they gave to the place.
That's right. It was named Police Coulee after they erected the fort there in 1887. And the police put the fort at what was a fairly logical place, but not the most advantageous position. It was at the bottom of at the mouth of the coulee on the right-hand side, and you can still see where the old depressions were where the fort once stood, fairly close to the water. And they were at a disadvantage because they knew that the rustlers could look down on them. People trying to avoid the police could look down and see when the police patrols, the Northwest Mounted Police, left the old fort. But of course they couldn't build on top because they had to be near the water for their horses and for the men in the fort.
So the disadvantage they just had to live with.
That's right. And this is one of the views you would have seen if you'd been a mounted policeman in that particular area from 1887 right into about 1916. You look northward into past the old Milk River and into that typical country of that badlands.
Yeah. We have a shot of some new writing on stone.
That's
when
right.
did the police, in their eternal quest for bandits, rum runners, and other ne'er-do-wells, have time to do this kind of stonework?
Well, this is marvelous because here's T.A. Dixon, Northwest Mounted Police, 1888, and that's verified. So that's 100 years ago, Mike. And one of the Mounted Police had spare time on his hands, so he went to there's a big face of sandstone right there, and they carved their initials or their names right into that sandstone.
Yeah. He obviously took a lot of care with his name, but then 1888 was just a little beyond him. I see other names on there like Philpott and others. All of these are people you knew were garrisoned at
Not
at this
all of
camp.
them are garrisoned. Some of them were people who were passing by, but many of them are Northwest Mounted Police, constables and officers in that particular post.
This photograph we're going to see next reminds me of, I think, every cowboy movie I ever saw where bandits were running away from the good guys.
That's right, and you can imagine if a mounted policeman, one of the constables, was trying to track down one of the rustlers in this particular area, he would be able to give him the slip very, very easily because there are literally hundreds of ways out of those hoodoos and into those hoodoos. So it's really a remarkable country. It's the kind of country you could wander in for 20 years, Mike, and go back to again.
Yeah. You have some just an amazing photograph of a place where a guy was hunkered down for a while.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me about that story.
Well,
Who was it that showed you that?
It's an interesting story because the rancher I traveled with, Lawrence Halmerast, knew the country extremely well, like the back of his hand. And he took me through this area, and we looked over the plains, and we looked over towards a coulee, and we couldn't see anything there. And he said, "Now, let me show you." And he took me down into the coulee, and then we walked down the coulee, and he said, "Look up there." And I looked up on the side of the coulee and up against the sandstone walls, and there was actually a cliff dwelling, which had been carved right into the actual sandstone itself, several hundred feet, several rooms in this particular house. Undoubtedly, the story is, from the locals, somebody on the run, somebody on the lam, trying to avoid the law.
Was that, do you think that was carved by a white man?
Oh,
or
yeah, for certain it was, yeah.
How big was it inside?
Well, about, if I recall it, this is about 14 or 15 years, Mike, so it'd be about 200 or 300 square feet, which is ample room for one individual.
And he could live in there and
never be detected, Mike.
and he'd hear the hoof beats over top of him
sure.
and know that he was not out of danger.
Yeah, never be detected.
Is that place still there?
Yeah, it's still there, sure, but you'd have to travel through a whole bunch of gates which are all locked and so on, which Halmerast knew, of course.
Excellent. Okay. There is a story. I think I called it Rustler's Cave, but you called it Horse Thieves' Cave. Tell me about that.
Generally, it's known locally as Horse Thieves' Cave. And Horse Thieves' Cave was a little cave that there had been a local rumor that in the 1890s, an American posse had come in from Montana chasing two rustlers. And, of course, the death penalty, you know, if you rustle horses or cattle, especially horses, it was the death penalty. And these guys holed up in a cave they called Horse Thieves' Cave, and they were supposed to be shot and all the rest of it. Well, one of the ranchers didn't believe it, but in 1909, a local rancher went into this area in the fall of the year, and he went in and looked at the cave and didn't see anything, and it happened, as he turned away from the cave, his gaze caught a glimpse of white in the underbrush. And he went down and looked at it, and there was a skull. And in the middle of the skull, a neat hole, and you can see it right in this photograph here, and close by was a belt buckle and the remains of a belt and a couple of old cowboy boots. This was one of the rustlers who had been cornered in the cave, shot by the posse, and they took the other one back, and probably Judge Lynch was the prosecutor there.
Judge Lynch.
Judge Lynch, of course, where we get the term "a guy's lynched," and it was
Judge
very
Lynch
quick
was
justice.
summary justice.
Indeed, justice on the high plains.
How did you come across the skull? Where did you pick up the skull and some of the other artifacts?
Well, that skull on that particular photograph is a duplicate of Lawrence Helmrast, and he has that in his collection, in his area, right close to this particular scene we're talking about today.
This country, has it been preserved at all? For example, when we saw the first writing on stone done by the Indians, that's been decimated. How about the other carvings of the people who stayed at the Northwest Mounted Police Fort?
Well, at the particular time when I traveled through there, Mike, it wasn't preserved. There was a small provincial park there, but that's all. Some of the local people were hoping that they would expand this into a large provincial park, because indeed it is really quite unique. Of all the Great Plains areas, of all the far west, this is the most typical. It's an absolutely intriguing area.
Fascinating. And with the writing on stone, the police fort, the rustlers, on all of the other components,
this is the
buffalo jumps.
Sure, this is the Old West, exactly as it should have been.
Okay. Got some other artifacts here which we can take a look at. These ones fascinate me because this is, would you call it a peace pipe? Or I mean, that's what we...
Yeah, it's smoking pipe. Yeah, we sometimes call it a peace pipe.
This one is maybe made by...
this is a trade pipe. So it was manufactured specifically for the Indian trade.
Because it's inlaid with some sort of a metal?
That's right, it's inlaid with a type of lead.
With a type of lead?
Yes, and then it has the various decorations on it which the Indians liked.
Okay. This one here is more potentially...
that's an older pipe, and that's made out of a particular stone called catlinite, which was named after George Catlin, the artist. And this particular stone was mined by the Indians, and they kept the area secret because they didn't want people to know about it. And it's easily carved and easily shaped.
You say that one of the signs that this is probably authentic is that the hole is...
Yeah, it's off-centered.
That's
right.
Am I giving away a trade secret by suggesting that?
Yes, perhaps, because that's one of the ways you can tell whether it's an original or whether it's a spurious specimen.
Okay, and this you say is an actual legitimate scalping knife?
Yeah, scalping knife, hunting knife. They'd use it for both, depending upon the circumstances. And there's still blood on that, and that's really quite a remarkable piece. Horsehair handle, bound in leather, and so on. And with your geometric design. So that's probably 1870s, 1880s.
And that's the story of the Milk River country.
That's the story of the Milk River country, the real Badlands, a unique part of western North America.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Okay,
fascinating.
Mike.
A little bit of a departure today, but next time on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, we'll get back to some of the usual subjects we cover, the search for precious metals, the towns that were built, the people who went through. We'll see you next time on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bye-bye.